Okay.
Start streaming. And uh okay, so I think we're live. Okay, it's 2:08, so only 8 minutes late. That's not bad for me. Okay, welcome everybody. No viewers yet, but I'm sure they'll roll in. To episode 8 of Kyle and Friends. This is, I believe, the first international episode. So up till now, I have only spoken to. Wait, let me. Yeah, up till now, I've only spoken to Americans. So we are breaking the we're breaking that wall, and we're being very inclusive and diverse, and bringing in a European, specifically a French Swiss, Will Janssens. So Will, welcome. And let's see. I can't really give your intro for you because I don't quite understand what your background is. Can you give the audience your background?
Sure, man. Thanks for having me first. And as you can hear, you will sort of hear a typical French accent, but I'm in the French-speaking part of Switzerland, so that's why I have this accent. I'm an exercise physiologist, so I have a master degree in sports sciences in Switzerland. I did this between Geneva and Lausanne for the people maybe who know these small cities in Switzerland. And well, basically, that's the first background. And then I got into coaching. I used to play a lot of badminton. I used to play in competition for about 15 years. And then I changed completely. I did things that had nothing to do with badminton, like breakdancing, and then bodybuilding, powerlifting, things like this. And I've been a coach for about 8 years now, to sum it up. And yeah, one more thing maybe in French. I wrote. I'm a co-author for 3 different books around fat loss. Let's say the fitness world in general and muscle building. So yeah, I wrote three different books.
All right. Yeah, I think I saw one of those. One of them is it Christoph
Yep,
with in a cartoon with the muscles showing, and he's got food
exactly. Yeah,
on the
that's the
cover.
one. That's the. It would be something like the secrets of how to build muscle or something like this in English.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so that gets to one of my first questions, which is, or just so I met, like I was saying before we went live, I remember talking to you in one of the Repeat Facebook groups years ago, and then I guess 2 years ago now, Vasilis asked me to do a video with him, and then I made friends with a bunch of French-speaking people, mostly on Instagram. And did they all have? Did they do a similar master's in exercise science like you did, or did they do different degrees, or how did you meet? And do you guys work together, and how much?
Okay, so it may sound a little bit messy, but we're basically all doing different things and sometimes even in different countries. So he's from Belgium, for example, Vasilis. I'm from Switzerland. Others, most of them come from France, which is the biggest country anyway. And man, most of us are probably coaches around the strength and conditioning type of stuff, and many of them are also nutritionists. But the when you say someone is a nutritionist, I don't know how it is in the US, but is it the equivalent of registered dietitian or something like this, or it's a completely
Usually.
different? Okay, because it's either this or you have a master degree in nutrition or something like this. But no, everything is different between every single one of us. So it would take probably a little bit too much time to specify everything.
Yeah. Yeah, it was just interesting to see because I guess when you're in America, you have a pretty American focus of everything. And, you'll hear about like a scientist or somebody from another country, but it's almost like to meet sort of younger people who are reading the same things or going through some type of process of this whole thing that's going on in the internet where people are learning about nutritional science and physiology, arguing about it. Uh, it's usually I think Americans think of it in an American focused context because English is sort of the universal language, so most of the things that people talk about just end up in English. But it's interesting to see. I mean, of course, you guys can read English and everything. It's interesting to wonder: are there people that, for example, might have read something I wrote, and they live in a country like I'll never meet them, but they have a friend group, or maybe they have their equivalent of a nutritional thing, nutritional like a registered dietitian in Bulgaria or something. And yeah, there's people all over that are, I assume, interested in this place. So speaking of Europe, I wanted to talk about. So on your Instagram, you often have pictures outside of your window. It's very beautiful. Is it the Alps?
Yeah,
That
it is.
okay.
Yeah.
So that looks fantastic. Sometimes you have some animals, like yesterday a goat. This was that one of your neighbors.
Yeah, exactly. My neighbors, not mine, unfortunately.
So where you live, can you have goats or chickens for yourself?
Yeah, I could. I changed place not, only about 3 to 4 months ago, so I'm not like completely settled right now. It's still, still have a few things to sort out first. But it's technically possible because I have a place where I could put, well, chickens basically, and yeah, even more if I wanted to. But there's a farm like. 6 or 7 minutes walk away, so it's really near already. And for now, it's enough. But yeah, it's the you say landscape.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean the place is really nice, and it's only small houses everywhere. It's not like big buildings and everything. The highest house is probably about 3 or 4 floors, not more than this. So,
Mm-hmm.
typical Swiss landscape, not too high houses, things like this. So yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, in America, in most states, I think you can't have chickens in a residential. So our areas are zoned. So there's places where you can build houses to live in, and then places you can have commercial activity. And in a lot of places, farming it's a weird thing where a farm animal, especially chickens, because if you don't have enough area, they can kind of smell bad, um, and they can be loud. But there's a lot of places, a lot of states where you can't have animals for yourself, and I guess there's not as much of a tradition of that. And unless you have a certain number of acres of land, and sometimes you actually have to have commercial activity. It's not very much though, but you have to say I've sold $1,000 American worth of farm product in order to actually have. So it's kind of everything in America is justified by commercial activity. um, and okay, so speaking of that, another thing that's nice that I believe is nice about Europe, and since we're talking about nutrition, is the food and food quality. Um, there's, maybe it's easier to get fresh food. There's more farms integrated closer to where people live, less industrial agriculture, and more stringency or restricted on what type of ingredients and preservatives can be put in processed foods. So in America, you know, you have, labels, ingredient labels tend to be longer than in Europe, I'm assuming. So what's your experience with that in Switzerland and I guess France too?
Okay, maybe it's a little bit closer to France, what you have in the US. And maybe here in Switzerland, it's a little bit different because, in many places where it's not huge, it's not big enough to have like only industrial places and then you can live here, etc. It's always a little bit mixed up. So that's the good thing also because there's a good proximity with the farms and other small farms, not necessarily huge ones. And so it's easier to have organic little farms nearby. So that's one thing. And then the organic label is pretty hard to get. I mean, it's you really have to follow strict rules. So that's a good thing for the organic part. And I didn't work, but I used to go once per week for about 6 months in an organic farm in Switzerland, in a place called Geneva. And I've been able to see how things had to be done in an organic farm in order to be labeled as such. And the good news is that it's not that easy. So as it's not that easy, you get a certain quality, and that's what you want in the end. So certain transparency and all that. And so this is for the organic part. But then, as any country in the world, you can import stuff, and they can come from anywhere. And then as long as people buy the stuff they put in supermarkets, they will get it anyway. So this part is the international part. But then we have, well, I could mention them, but we have two big supermarkets in Switzerland. They have like 80% of the market, just these two. And then we have other ones. And then you have everyone who works as an independent. And so, I would say it's more mixed up. Maybe it's not a good example because the farm next to me is just 6-7 minutes away if I go by foot. So for others, it may take 15-20 minutes with the car. So it depends, but still, small country, not many people. In some places where you live, only one city would be enough to to put everyone from Switzerland in there. So
Right. Somebody in the comments, actually a couple people, asked about the French paradox. So that's, kind of a
oh yeah.
blast from the past that people used to. That was an early, I guess, one of the first topics that people, fat, dietary fat, having to do, eating fat doesn't make you fat, kind of Gary Taubes and all those people. So have you, well, first of all, are you always in Switzerland, or do you move around a little bit, like for work, or do you like to travel throughout Europe?
I'm really not far from France. It takes about a couple of hours to go there. So that's the place I go the most often, I would say. Otherwise, I stay there. I've been traveling a lot, but earlier. I'm 33 now. I've been traveling a lot until 23 years old, pretty much all over the world, but with my family for holidays, things like this. But now I'm pretty happy here. When you've seen many parts of the world, you're happy to come back in Switzerland because I have to say it's pretty unique. So yeah, I'm happy here.
Okay, so you see a lot of people. Do people from other parts of Europe come through your area often? Do you see like French people, German people, Italians, etc.?
Oh, it depends. Not to say I'm not really social or something like this. It's just it's not.
You
I
hang out
don't
at home a
see.
lot?
Well, here in Switzerland, I have friends around where I live, which is we have just like different states. We have something we call canton, and they're small places basically. And this canton here is a Valais, and so we have more than 20 different cantons, even if the country is really small. And here around, I have my friends there, and usually I see these guys. But sometimes I would say 3-4 times per year, I meet people from France, Belgium, sometimes other countries as well. But that's it, pretty much.
Okay, so I'm wondering, just like with the French paradox and maybe even expanding it out. So more than an American, you see or have seen throughout your lifetime people from France, just normal people outside at cafes or restaurants, people from different countries. Do you have a sense of which, maybe on average, which countries seem to have, say, for example, like thinner people or people that seem healthier, or Does it really seem like a country like France, where the people tend to consume a lot of rich food, or at least that's the stereotype, but stay somehow on average thinner than Americans who eat, I guess you could say, rich food, rich in calories, perhaps not as rich in culinary technique, but certainly in energy content. And the stereotype is that Americans are fat. And I don't know. I don't, when I walk around, I don't tally when I walk down the street how many fat people I see, how many thin people I see, but it's certainly not rare where I am and the different places I've been to see quite a few overweight people. So, is it true that the average person, just on the street is thinner in Europe or maybe France specifically or Switzerland specifically?
Well, I hope not many people are going to hold what I'm going to say against me, but it's not that hard to be thinner in general than what you guys have in, in America. So that's the first thing. But then I would say in the Swiss German speaking part of Switzerland, people tend to be relatively thin and they are really good in like rules around physical activity. They tend to encourage much more physical activity, and yeah, they're pretty good at this. And I wouldn't say it's necessarily only a question of food. And for France, you think about what wine, cheese, and bread, or something like this. Or
Yeah,
um,
and
well,
pastries.
yeah, sure. I would say even in Paris, it's not necessarily the case, but. Yeah, hard to say. Maybe you will find less people that are directly attracted to these typical fast foods like McDonald's, Burger King, and all that. And maybe that's a big part of it. But still, people still go there. They get other things, kebab, stuff like this, and it's not necessarily better. It's hard to say, but in general, sure, we, if I may say, as a French-speaking people, are a little bit thinner, but it's not really that complicated compared to what is happening in the US. So, not sure exactly where you want me to go, but sure, in general, in average, we are a little bit thinner.
Yeah, I think that the paradox in terms of what people eat has been, I think that those people that talked about that and maybe said, "Oh, butter doesn't make you fat
Yeah,
because
for
look at
example.
French people." They're probably focusing on the wrong thing, and it seems to me like it's probably a lot of little things that have to do with the relationship between people in a country and their food. Um, like in America, in most places you celebrate with food or you have an activity around food, a get together around food. And by sort of tweaking things like what kinds of foods or what the activity is, like do you do something and then eat food or you just hang out and eat food as an activity and things like that. I think that makes a difference in people walking around. Like nobody walks in America except
Mm.
in the major cities. So I think that's probably. I forgot to say one of my good friends from graduate school speaks French, and she wanted me to welcome you to the channel in French, and
Oh yeah.
she wrote out a text message, and I practiced it, but now I forget how to say it. So I'm gonna say this. You tell me if you can understand this, okay?
Okay.
Merci d'être venu parler avec moi sur ma chaîne aujourd'hui.
So I didn't get the two last words, but the beginning was really good. No, honestly, the beginning was good. Just the two last words, I didn't get it.
Yeah, I think this was better before. So it was, yeah, venez parler avec moi sur ma chaîne aujourd'hui.
Yep.
Aujourd'hui.
Okay, that was good. So thanks for coming here on my channel today. Oh, nice. Good effort.
All right. So that's the extent of my French. I mean, I know no French. Uh, so yeah, the French paradox. That's not too interesting to me. There's One thing that is interesting about the paradoxes, I think, is their proliferation. So at first there's like the French paradox. There was this stuff about Inuit peoples, that eat like whale blubber and stuff, and then countries like maybe Indonesia or Southeast Asian countries where they eat like 80 or 90% of their calories from starch. Um, and all over the world, basically, if you take as the baseline that you have to eat a certain macronutrient ratio or certain foods to be healthy and lean, all you find around the world is exceptions. And so I think really, uh, it's kind of silly. So speaking of that, what do you think about macronutrients? So now we can get into the nutritional science thing. So do you think that macronutrients are important at all, for example, like gaining or losing weight, or do you lean towards more the calories, or do you think they both work together?
So well, usually what I do, and then compared to other people, I would say some people say you just have to be, for example, in a calorie deficit in order to lose weight. To put it briefly like this, and they won't go further if you're not losing weight. They're just saying basically you're eating too much or not moving enough. Well,
Mm-hmm.
okay. So some people just stop there, and the more you go into the fitness industry, the more you add also the amount of protein that you should get by the end of the day. Like let's say 1 gram per pound, as a general rule. People say this because 1 gram is easy to remember. In When we talk about kilos instead of pounds, we tend to suggest a little bit less, probably also simply because we don't have this 1 gram per pound to remember. And so we tend to say 1.6, 1.8 grams per kilograms or something like this. And it's a little bit less,
You have
which
to
would
do
be
math.
2.2. Yeah, you have to do maths. That's the problem whenever you have a rule. And so the second category of people is probably going to also focus on protein, also for the satiety thing and for the thermogenic effect of food, like just as a summary, plus the muscle protein synthesis thing, to make sure that you keep as much lean mass as possible while losing weight. So that's like the beginning, the basis. And if you want to put on muscle, basically it's the same. You want to put on more muscle or as much muscle as possible and the least amount of fat as possible. And then you have this variation. So what's left for the remaining part of the calories, and then you can choose basically between carbs and fat, and then you have all these things. So are omega-3s essential or not? If they are, then you should start with this. If you don't consider they are, maybe you have other options first. Then you have maybe the repeat perspective, or where you try to stabilize your glucose throughout the day. Maybe you try to have, let's say, at least 2 times more carbohydrates than a protein, because you have this insulin reaction with protein, like also because of leucine. So it depends, but from let's say the evidence-based crowd, I would say you generally start by putting the amount of calories that you need. So you want to put on weight, okay? So let's just make sure you're on the surplus, or at least you're not losing weight whilst you're practicing your strength sport or whatever. And then make sure you have enough protein. Then whether or not you think they're essential, your essential fatty acid, then the other stuff, and make sure you have enough energy throughout the day. And then it's a question of personal preferences. So that's like the easy go-to for body composition that we typically hear. But then that's not exactly the way I think about it, because with this perspective and all the things I've read around the repeat universe, I would say, I tend to focus much more on fruits. If it's not fruits, it's like potatoes, things that is well cooked potatoes. Then animal proteins like eggs, milk, cheese, some things that are similar to really low fat Greek yogurt. Like we call them quark serré in French, which is similar to skyr. I don't know if you have skyr.
Yeah,
From
Iceland.
Iceland, yeah, yeah, you got it, cool. And these types of things are amazing because for 100 grams you have 10 grams, 10, 11 grams of protein, and it's really lean basically, and the quality of protein is really good. So, I tend to focus on these fruits, like also for the vitamins and minerals, and then you can think about liver once per week. You can think about oysters, things like this, and so everything is like together. You cannot just say, okay, I have my skyr or I have my Greek yogurt, and then whatever, I take my multivitamins and everything is sorted. So
So do you in your experience, so you do coaching for are you the people that you coach, they're trying to gain muscle or
some
lose
of them.
fat, both?
Some of them as well. Most of them are struggling with the post yo-yo diet thing. So they all try to lose weight. They regain everything, if not more usually. And then they're at a point where they come to see me and say, well, basically, I think my body is not working anymore. There's something that I need to do because I've tried everything. They come like this, and then we start to talk about simple things like, have you tried to not eat your muscles throughout the day
Mhm.
because you're not eating any sugar or things like this, and we start to build up different habits and yeah, the metabolic perspective, if I may say, and usually that's most of people I coach right now. Even if I've been coaching for about 8 years, that's like two last years, almost exclusively around this.
So do you find that that makes a difference? Like, so of course, in a clinical setting, right? If you just read the average weight loss study, say for a month or 3 months, the results are pretty conclusive that I guess you could put somebody on a diet, give them whatever micronutrients they need, and say a certain amount of protein, and then just give them like tallow fat or like almost anything, right? And as long as the calories are kept at a certain deficit or surplus, then their weight will react accordingly. So that's what's seen um, in that kind and that's some of the stuff that is pushing the evidence based community to um, not that they don't care about food quality, but to de-emphasize things like it doesn't matter what the macronutrient ratio is. Most things don't matter. So in your experience, uh, either with yourself or with your clients, does do you get like better results from a certain macronutrient ratio or including certain foods that maybe isn't stuff that's vetted in clinical research?
Sure, I perfectly see what you mean, and it may be a little bit not technical, but I'm going to talk about numbers. Is it fine on your channel or?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So usually instead of talking about calories, I talk about calories divided per kilograms. So basically, you get a number that is normalized by the body weight, so you can talk about the same thing with different people. So you have
So do you
someone
just
at
use body weight, or do you include their like
No,
lean
not
mass?
no, not the lean mass, not for this one. But
Okay.
when you think about protein, for example, and I coach a bodybuilder or grade three obesity person, even if they both weigh about 110 kilos. One is going to be like 9% body fat, and the other maybe 45% body fat. So obviously, at this point, for the protein amount, I always consider lean body mass for sure. But for the caloric perspective, I usually start just by dividing this by the weight. And typically you get something pretty amazing. So between, I would say, 25 and 35 kilocalories per kilo. So you just multiply your weight basically by, so your weight in kilograms, sorry. You just multiply it by 25, for example, you're in the lower part of the metabolic of the metabolism. I would say here, if you try to lose weight, it's going to be really complicated because you're not starting with a lot of calories. That's obvious, but I want to start there. So to make things clear. On the opposite part, if you start with 35 or 40 kilocalories per kilo, so let's say you weigh 100 kilos, you can eat about 4,000 calories per day. Uh, no problem if you want to cut 1,000 calories because you still have 3,000 left, so it's not a problem. So you have to start with numbers, and numbers then that everyone can compare themselves with. So kilocalories per kilo, between 25 and 35, that's like the typical people I coach. And 35 is pretty high. If you do, for example, 3 to 5 sessions of 1 hour of strength training per week, for example, 35 would be a good start. And if someone says, okay, Will, I'd like to lose weight, basically I'm going to say yes, no problem. If you start the same thing, but you start at 25, usually pretty much every time what I do is that I try to change the macronutrient ratios and the food quality and a few things about micronutrients as well, like calcium to phosphate, things like this. And if I can get at least as much calcium as a phosphate, it's a good start. Then if I can switch the percentages of macronutrient and make sure that one, they have at least 2 times more carbohydrates than protein, and that they have enough protein to make sure that the liver is functioning well, but also as we are talking about building muscle or keeping lean mass while cutting calories, they should get at least 1.5 times their body weight in gram of protein. So I'm always talking in kilograms. Sorry, I hope it doesn't bother you too much, but it will be too hard to convert everything in pounds. So it should be something like 0.7 or 0.8 grams per pound of body weight.
Yeah.
And as long as they get this, then I try to get 2 times more of carbohydrates. If they respond well to, for example, fruits, even honey or milk or things like this, I would focus on these. And they tend to lose weight even without changing the amount of calories just by doing this. So that's a really cool thing, is that it's not 1 out of 10. It's most of them. When we change the ratios, we enhance basically food quality, and we have a few changes in the micronutrients, especially calcium. They tend to change their body composition and or to lose weight. So you can see waist circumference changes, things like this, performance enhancing things in the gym or things like that. So yeah, and this is not something you're supposed to find in one study, because I haven't found any that is designed this way. It would be amazing, but so far it's not something I've found. Maybe you heard of something like this. And yeah, I have pretty good result with these. And maybe one last thing I can say is that if they don't want to lose weight and we change these things and they start to lose weight, because this does happen, then what I do is usually I increase the amount of calories again by 1 kilocalorie per kilo. So it means that if you are 100 kilos, you increase just by 100 calories in 1 week. If you are 50 kilos, you increase only by 50 calories, which is not a lot, but it's the same amount relative to the body weight. And then I try to do this with a certain type of food, for example, ripe fruit, sometimes even sugar, if they have enough micronutrients, and we see this on chronometer. They have everything they need. We just add a little bit of sugar to make sure they can eat more. And then you see pretty much everything getting better. Also like temperature, armpit, and be under the tongue. I don't know how you say this.
Yeah, that's right.
Sublingual.
Yes.
Yeah, sublingual temperature. So yeah, if this answers.
Okay, so you use chronometer. Is that how you estimate caloric requirements for people and for yourself?
Also, yeah, if they don't like micronutrients at all, and it's complicated because it's only in English, so we have to translate. Yeah. We have to make lists that are the equivalent in French. But for people who can at least once put everything in English, even in the French-speaking part, I always use Chronometer. But then we have MyFitnessPal, LifeSum, all these other apps, but mainly for macronutrients.
Yeah, I don't use it for micronutrients either, because I don't think the databases are as reliable or good. It's because macronutrients, if you have like some liver or an apple or something, the macronutrients are going to be pretty accurate. But I think micronutrients can vary a lot. So I use chronometer,
Yep.
and all right. So of course I'm using pounds, but let me just real quick. Pounds to kilograms. So I am about, let's say, 173 pounds. So say like 78 kilograms,
Yep.
and it gives me as my daily expenditure about 2,567 kilocalories. Does that sound right?
Yep. Just gonna make it small.
And I think I added, let me see here, settings. I think I have for my body fat 14%.
Yep.
Now, changing the body fat on this doesn't change the calories too much. It's mostly, as you were saying, it's mostly the weight. So, all right. So in my example, I guess how many calories, if I wanted to lose body fat, would you suggest? I consume. So it basically, if I consume over about 2,600, it tells me I'm in a surplus. And this is based on, I think I entered moderate exercise.
Hmm.
So of course I can change with that too. But just in general, and also when you want to lose, when you or one of your clients wants to lose body fat, how quickly do you try to do that? And do you think it's bad, to try to lose weight too fast? And how much of a deficit do you usually try to get?
Okay, I can start with your example, for example. I'll start with you.
Please.
So, if you just divide the numbers of calories by 78, which is 32 kilocalories per kilo, that would be your metabolic number, if I may say. So
Mm-hmm.
you're in the upper part. What I mean is that if you go from 32 kilocalories per kilo and then you decrease, for example, by 4 or 5, let's say you remove 4 kilocalories per kilos, you're still at 28. And so at 28, it would be 2,200 calories in average, pretty much. It doesn't mean it's the perfect number or something. It
Mm-hmm.
just means you can start with this and say, okay, if I can start with this and I don't feel I'm too hungry, I don't feel I want to kill everyone around me, I can maintain my performance in the gym.
Mm-hmm.
And also, you can, if you want to, take your temperature, your body temperature, and especially under the armpits, because I don't know if you know Tomo Littlewood.
Yes.
You know, yeah. Okay, so I had some really good advice from him with the measurements and between the thong and the armpit. If you have like more than zero point 0.5 degrees, so Celsius again, sorry, as a difference, it may mean that you are running too much on cortisol, for example. So that's also one thing you can consider, because basically cortisol is going to be required as long as the deficit is too important. Even if you have a lot of carbs, at a certain point you are going
Mm-hmm.
to burn more carbs than you have available anymore. That's normal.
So
And
is that
so
because the sublingual temperature should actually be more steady? And
yeah,
if
it should
you're,
be higher because
yeah.
it's closer to the brain.
So if you're in a
So
stress state, you'll see a drop first, you
yeah,
know,
more on
outer.
a
Yeah.
yeah, exactly, yeah.
Okay.
So the closer you are to the center,
Mm-hmm.
the organs and the brain, etc. If you take here or in the ear or here even, sometimes you can measure here, it should remain relatively stable. And typically, if you see a drop like 1 or 1.5 degrees, which happens, like they are at 35.5 instead of 37 degrees Celsius, it will almost all the time be under the armpits. And sometimes it remains almost the same, like 36.5, like only a zero point 0.5 drop in the mouth. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's pretty steady. So that's a big thing. And if they go too low, if the caloric deficit is too important, or they don't have enough room of calories when they start with, you can see it pretty quickly. Like they don't sleep well, their digestion is awful. You're not even talking about libido because it's going to be just at zero. You have all these things, and you can keep them in mind. And instead of saying how quickly I can lose weight, is how fast can I go without having like this list of problems that can be pretty huge. So usually what I do is this. So I start, if I take your case, are you, let's say, above 30 kilocalories per kilo? You are clearly above. Okay, let's try. You can lose weight and you start with a pretty high metabolism, which is cool. And so you have a margin. That's the start. If you don't have a lot of margin, like in my calculations, I typically find a number which is 22 or 23 kilocalories per kilo. That's like the lower part where it's going to be really hard to get one, enough protein, two times as much carbohydrate as protein, whilst still having a little bit of calories remaining for fat, because you are going to find fat anyway, even if you eat white fish or chicken or things like this, you are going to get some fat anyway. It's almost impossible to go between below 12, 15% if you're not like doing something ridiculously strict. So below 23, if you do this, you will have to cut all other things that I don't like to cut usually. And so you won't have enough to sustain health, I would say, for a long period of time. Was this clear or too many calculations? I'm sorry. I'm not sure.
No, that's clear. And
Okay.
people can handle kilocalories. So I, when I work in the lab, I have to use Celsius and I have to use grams and kilograms and all that
Okay.
stuff. So I'm comfortable with it, and people can too. So yeah, that kind of also brings in. Do you ever recommend or use reverse dieting to? And how much do you think, or how much have you observed that people can change their sort of basal metabolic rate by increasing calories over time? Or, of course, body composition is something that everybody agrees can change the basal metabolic rate, but even other things like things having to do with stress. Somebody in the comments said coffee. Like if you drink a bunch of coffee, obviously people do use that as a fat burner. Maybe that's a little bit more temporary and not permanent, but have you seen people significantly change, as far as you can tell, their basal metabolic rate with diet?
Yeah, clearly, because if you account for physical activity and body composition, like basically their body is not changing so quickly that, for example, in 2 months it will be like really significant, or they don't change that much the number of steps they do per day, like 20,000 steps or 10,000 steps, like a huge change. Without this, what I tend to see is that after a diet, when you increase slowly, again, so the same rule, every week plus 1 kilocalorie per kilo. So you take your body weight in kilograms, you change this into calories, and you add this once every week. And if you do this, and you do this with the right types of food, like for example, you add either honey or fruit juice or, basically glucose and fructose, plus sometimes even the other nutrients, but basically that's the most important part. And if you do this and you make sure that you're not too stressed out and you try to avoid a few things that can be, not everyone will agree on this, but I'm gonna say that's what I do. Anti-metabolic things like I would reduce fish oils. I would reduce like cruciferous vegetables. I would reduce things like this, and I would try not to do. If you, for example, if you do CrossFit and you do your WOD and you go on what we say AMRAP, as many reps as possible, and you're always like you almost like you want to throw throw things. If you avoid this and you go more towards not necessarily bodybuilding type, but you don't want to feel bad after each single set. So if you try more to stimulate the muscle, to reduce stress, to get a good amount of sleep, and what you increase is basically more coming from sugar, and on top of this you can even get a good exposure to light. It's amazing how much you can get of a change. Like I've seen in 8 weeks, 8 kilocalories per kilo change, so one per week without gaining any weight. What I mean is that if you are 100 kilos and you start by eating 2,500 calories, and then 8 weeks later, 2 months later, you are eating 3,300 calories and you haven't gained any weight. So that's not like amazing, but I find it huge. So
So that would be like
it's
starting on a pretty significant diet for that size person,
yeah,
where they're
clearly, yeah,
probably hungry
yeah,
most of the time and maybe having some symptoms like sleep issues or things like that
exactly,
from and
and low temperature as well.
right, and so and then going into something that would be more of a sustainable maintenance and then doing that while staying weight stable.
Yep, yeah, perfectly summed up.
Yeah, it would be nice if there were studies like that. Um, I guess the only weight studies that have really been done are around just calories and then macronutrient ratio and things like exercise. Oh, by the way, do you think that a deficit or a surplus, do you think calories from expenditure or from changing intake are generally equivalent or different? Like, if somebody just wanted to cut 200 calories out of their diet, uh, do you think it's better for losing weight to do that by adding some amount of cardio that they're not doing, or to cut out some food, or is it the same to you?
Um, if you start with someone that is really sedentary, I would try to increase a little bit the amount of steps or something like this that they're doing because they're not doing anything and basically probably a little bit of sport or strength training or yoga or anything would probably help. So that's from this perspective, like an extreme. I would then use the expenditure as a tool. But when it's not the case and they're already doing quite a lot of things, they can be also stressed out and they may all already be exercising like 6 times per week.
Mm-hmm.
I may even try to reduce this as a starting point to make sure that the basis is going to be, have you ever tried to maintain your weight without being too stressed out? And once they can get this, then we can put a stress. A caloric deficit is a stress.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's going to be by reducing the amount of food instead of increasing once again the amount of expenditure. So that would be the two extremes. So someone that is already doing too much and is already stressed out, so like most of people, and on the other side, someone that is not doing anything at all and moving a little bit would be good. So that would be a good starting point just to see where the person is going to go just by increasing 5,000 steps, something like this, which is it's not hard. It's not too stressful. You're just walking basically, and you weren't walking at all before. And in between, I would say for someone that is already a little bit exercising, usually start by changing the macronutrients, and then only I go to a caloric deficit because some people with the change, the quality of the food, the macronutrient ratios, they start to lose weight to change their waist circumference and all that. So it's technically a caloric deficit, but it may be that their metabolism is changing to a point, which is not huge, but to a point that they are letting their body now lose weight. So they're not eating enough with the good amount of food that they're providing to their body right now.
Right. So I guess a lot of people would say, and I think you mentioned this before, if a client says I'm not losing weight, the assumption is that maybe they're lying to you about how much they're eating. Um, uh, I guess there's really no way. I mean, in studies, the only way to account for that is to label the water,
Yep.
to give them labeled water, and then you can actually chart the macronutrients and their exhaled CO2. Their how much calories they are using and what they are. And then outside of that, there's which and that's very expensive. It's all of those things. So, uh, do you think? Do you actually think that there's people who have maybe very sensitive metabolisms who maybe aren't lying, or maybe they're slightly exaggerating by how little they eat, but they're eating what should be a deficit and they're not losing weight? Do you actually think that exists, or do you think most of those people are just lying?
I think about three things. Maybe the first one, which should be obvious for everyone that has already tried to lose weight, is that sometimes when you are actually in a caloric deficit, you tend to be a little bit more stressed. So you may retain more water at this moment. And just like I don't know, you're putting back carbs after a low carb diet. You may think that you are putting on fat, but basically you're just restoring your glycogen, and you are going to weigh more. So that's one thing you need to consider. So are you only tracking the weight, and is it only during the first couple of weeks, or are you tracking the weight plus the waist circumference, for example? So that's just to get this out. So here, if people are usually in a calorie deficit, the only thing you have to do is to wait a little bit more, and then you see that they get used to this, or they lose a little bit more of the water. Which it was difficult at the beginning because it was really stressful, and sometimes even when you increase calories, they lose the weight because they're not stressed anymore. So that's one part. Then people that are not lying, that are not losing weight, and that may have a really adaptive metabolism. Yeah, I've seen this for sure, but I cannot, just because I don't have doubly labeled water, I cannot say I'm 100% sure. But my hypothesis is this one. I'm not cheap as a coach. I don't know if I can say it this way. So if you pay a lot of money, and then you want results, but you're not doing anything. There's something that doesn't make a lot of sense. So at least you should try to do what the coach is telling you to do. That's what I mean. So if you start from there, I would have seen too many people not losing weight, or maybe there are liars everywhere, and maybe we're just in such a bad word that everyone is lying as possible as well. But I really don't believe people would lie up to this point. So the metabolism can change. What we know, and also in the studies, is that you can decrease the NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, a lot. And for people, this can be absolutely huge. Like if you increase calories and you don't put on any weight, some people start to, they move everything a little bit more. Some people just walk the calories out, if I may say. And one strategy that does exist now is that when you are losing weight, you can put a weighted vest. How do you say this?
Yeah,
You can.
weight vest.
Yeah, you say this? Okay, thanks. And you can increase the amount of pounds that you've lost directly in the vest. And this is something that almost reduce the amount of change that you have in the decrease of need. So if you tend to move less, you just increase the amount of weight you have on the vest. And apparently you have sensors like in the bones or things like this saying, no, you're still putting the same amount of pressure on the bones, and it also regulates the appetite and things like this. But for example, if your question was, I put someone on 700 calories, I've never done this, but let's say it was the case, and they weigh 100 kilos and they're not losing weight. This is not something I've seen, but I know some people tell stories about people not losing weight at all at 800 or 900 calories. This is not something I have seen, but I don't know. I don't know how it could be possible. Maybe for someone really, really like for 45 kilos person, okay, that would be possible. It would be 20 kilocalories per kilo for this person. It would be the equivalent of 2,000 calories for 100 kilos person. So that would be okay. You could understand this, and this is something I've seen. Someone weighing 100 kilos, not losing weight, was eating 2,000 calories, which is not normal for a 100-kilo guy. But a 100 kilos guy eating like 1,200 calories and not losing weight, this is not something I've seen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess part of the debate is how wide is the window for these changes? Because obviously, if you don't eat anything at all, you'll starve, and it doesn't matter. And if you just force feed yourself all day, you're going to gain weight. But in between those extremes, it seems like there's a difference in how people respond. Obviously, everybody understands that, from their own personal experience, as they get older, it seems like they can't eat as much without gaining weight. So do you think, actually, that's something that people would probably argue about, because younger people probably have more spontaneous activity, but I think it's probably that the spontaneous activity that younger people have is because they have more of a metabolism going on, so they just, without thinking about it, they just move around more because they feel good, and that it's not necessarily, that young people are, if they were forced to sit down, they would just get fat like an older person. Um, but do you think, like Ray Pete, right? One of his suggestions is to try to mimic the metabolism of a young person as opposed to an older person, and getting rid of PUFAs and exposing yourself to red light and things, and even some of the hormones like taking pregnenolone or progesterone, etc. Do you do any of that, and do you find that that helps with yourself or with clients?
For the nutrition part and the red light, yeah, I have a red light when I don't go out because it's sunny here. I have my red light obviously, but for the hormonal part, I've tried myself a few things. Even progesterone. My voice didn't change or something, but no,
That's
just
good.
it was fun to try. But yeah, I felt the difference, but also because I was measuring the temperature, and that's something important, I guess, because when you consider this, maybe we can talk about the uncoupling effect, maybe the theory behind this, and the fact that you can generate a lot more heat without necessarily adding too much ATP. I don't know. Maybe we can talk about this, but I would say if you're really below 37 degrees, so where you should be, there's a lot of margin to go back to the normal point. So to the young metabolism. But if you are already at 37, I'm not sure you can, like, I don't know, add 2,000 calories of sugar, for example, and not putting, no, just as an example, it would be 500 grams of sugar. I would do this to try. That would be fun. I'm not sure you are not going to put on any weight because it's a certain amount of calories anyway, and you can do de novo lipogenesis. It's not going to be easy. You are not going to feel hungry at all because I mean with that much no, it's going to be difficult. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I would definitely try this. But I think people are um, are able to eat more without putting on weight because they are restoring a part of their thermoregulation that they didn't have before. And as the temperature is linked with the thyroid, I have it's difficult for me to pronounce it. With metabolism, basically, the temperature, the metabolism are linked. This is where you have the biggest amount of margin. For example, if I start with a client that is at 35.6 under the armpit, for example, when they wake up, and we change many things, and they get a meal before bed. They don't drink as much water, especially before they go to bed and things like this. And we managed to increase by about 1 degree, 1 whole degree Celsius. They are going to be able to eat more every time. That's for sure. But what I don't know is that someone that is already close to 37 in the mouth and under the armpit, if they can really increase a lot. That's not something I've seen as much. Again, as you said, it's a question of how much margin you have on one side or the other, and maybe it would be good to talk about numbers, maybe not all the time, but just to make sure we're talking about something we can measure. And these types of change, I feel warm. I want to move more with, and we can say spontaneous physical activity, not necessarily non-exercised activity. And you want to move more when you eat more. Like after a fruit salad and it's sunny, you want to move more. You don't have to think about it. It's something that is going to happen. So I'm a little bit in between these two words. It's only physical activity and what you eat, and you have this light component, you have the stress component, you have how much sugar you eat, you have the thyroid thing, you have all this hormone side.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a little bit in between, I would say.
Yeah, I always end up like that too, where sometimes I'll watch like Danny's stream with Ray or anything like that, and I'll feel a little like I don't know if I agree with everything that Ray is saying, but then I'll see somebody on Instagram just say that the whole perspective of thinking about your metabolism is stupid, and then I'll get mad about that too, because and I'll want to like defend Ray. It's like, no, he did. Yeah, that's not what he said, or and it's kind of funny. But I guess, internet thrives on drama anyway. So if
Sure.
somebody's going to say something, they're going to say the most extreme version for their followers. So when you mentioned uncoupling, this is actually one of the things that I don't like about some of the things Ray talks about, and people that are associated with him. Have you read or heard that much of Gilbert Ling's stuff on cells?
Only a little bit. I tried, but it's hard. It's really
Yeah,
hard.
so Ray references a lot. I think he did more in the past a little bit, but he was pretty convinced. And there's some very interesting stuff in Gilbert Ling's work. And one of the things he says is that the production of, well, he kind of looks at ATP as a different process, that it ends up getting produced from consuming energy in the mitochondria, and it ends up fueling the work of proteins in the cell, but he just has a different mechanism by which that happens. But the accounting is basically the same. You get pretty much the same amount of ATP from the process of oxidizing fuels. But he also says that the hydrogen ion gradient produced between the membranes and the mitochondria is not happening, that's not the way that the electron transport chain creates that gradient, and then that goes through the ATPase and makes ATP, that's not how ATP is generated. But then, and I believe Ray more or less agrees with that view. But then Ray and other people talk about uncoupling proteins, which I can't imagine another way in which they work other than the proposed theory in the mainstream world, which is that they're stuck in the inner membrane of the mitochondria, and they let the hydrogen ions through other than through the ATPase. So they let that gradient that is the result of the energy flow of the electrons going from the carriers, taking it from glucose and anything that turns into acetyl CoA, through that whole process, and pushing the hydrogen ions in between the intermembrane space. Um, and it's things like that that really bother me, because if you're gonna say, so there's these proteins, the uncoupling proteins that and when they're found in a higher, their presence is higher. Animals, usually this is experimental animals, produce more heat, and they can consume more calories without gaining weight. And then there's the biochemistry side of what they do, and it seems to be like they get in the way of the most efficient expression of the hydrogen ion gradient to produce ATP. Um, so I don't know how far you've gotten into that type of science about this stuff, but do you ever read things like that where somebody's actually using an argument or a point from a perspective that they disagree with to
Anytime.
prove their point?
Yeah, yeah.
And like, so with the Gilbert Ling stuff, like, and a lot of times this comes up with like genetic stuff. Like some people will say, genes don't really matter, and that you can address disease conditions or metabolism or whatever with environment. But then they might say a certain nutrient, or if you take, say, progesterone or something, or even if you take testosterone, right? It's, it increases the activity of this protein. But then that protein is, say, the product of a gene that's like, its expression is upregulated by steroids, supposedly, or that's the theory. So where do you come down on all that kind of stuff? Like, how much how much incorrectness do you feel like, or do you even are you even concerned with things at the cellular level or physiologically? because obviously what you do, I mean, all that really matters is things that work and that people improve their health and reach whatever kind of fitness goals they have. And are you that interested in the nitty gritty of it? Like when you think about red light, and people, oh, it's exciting, the cytochrome C oxidase in this, and it gets this many millimeters past the skin, or the pineal gland is blue versus red light, yada yada. How much do you think about that stuff? And does it concern you at all that people kind of have these arguments? And I don't know. What do you think?
No, sure. The first thing is a social media rule is that basically you shouldn't care too much about what the others are arguing about something, but then
I could
there's
use
all the
more of
rest.
that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it depends what you have to do during your day. If you have nothing to do, it's good. If you want to argue with everyone, it's cool. I mean, I know a few people that are doing this, but no, I'm really interested in this kind of things. But the problem is that I don't have your accuracy in the biochemistry. So I can understand a few things, but they already probably aren't as accurate as they should be for me to really understand the thing. For example, if I read Gerald Pollack,
Hmm.
Fourth Phase of Water, or something like this, I will be able to understand. But then, if I go back to a few summary from Gilbert Ling, I will eventually get lost. So that's the limit. It's not my curiosity; it's more my current level of understanding at this level. So, and then if you get both things like light plus water plus what's around the cell if there's anything. The Gerald Pollack thing is pretty good because it's easy to understand, and then you can understand that if you cut a cell and there's no like water out of them, as he says, and it remains like structured, just like a gel. You can understand that there's something wrong with
Hmm.
the current model, and that's the biggest step. Is that if you can prove, I mean, if you can explain, and as long as you remain honest intellectually, you can understand that right now there's a problem and that it can be profitable for many people for sure. But that's another part of the story, even if they're always linked. So you have to get into economics, politics. Then you go back to physiology. Then you have to understand biochemistry at the cell level. And if you still understand what a cell is, because a cell is maybe not what it's supposed to be, you have all these things, and you get lost pretty quickly. And at the beginning, I was completely crazy when I started to read all of that. But it was a really good experience to be completely lost at a certain point because what you get is humility. Like, okay, I'm really not sure what I know right now. But then you go back to a few things that you can apply and you can see how people are getting better or getting worse. And I try to understand, but I always try to go back to a few things that I can measure, like temperature, for example,
Hmm.
like gym performance, like a scale out of 10, how do you feel? How is your libido? How many hair you are falling? Things like this. And then I'm not sure because I cannot explain everything about what's going on, but I try to understand as much as possible as long as I can go back to something I can put into practice, if this answers your question.
Yes. Yeah. The process that I went through. So there, I remember in graduate school, when I started taking courses, and I was given reading assignments of research papers. And on the one hand, I wanted to like read everything, like and sort of try to understand everything that. And you go through these phases of being very discouraged because something won't make sense, and then or you learn about something else and it makes previous things that you learned seem like they weren't important or they're wrong or something. Uh, and what I've landed on is that um, kind of like how the scientific method supposedly focuses on disproving things rather than proving them. What I found is that you can evaluate claims of people if you try to learn quite a bit about that field and see whether it seems like they know what they're talking about or whether they're making things up. And that's a lot easier. It's a lot easier to get at the truth by chipping away people that are obviously not telling the truth than sort of looking at a whole perspective, like somebody that's talking about a carnivore diet. I remember years ago, like when I first was doing raw vegan diet, and I was on a forum that everybody was talking about diet and stuff, and somebody was talking about how, and I didn't know anything, and they were saying the first thing you eat sets your body up for what you're going to burn throughout the day. So if you eat fat as your first meal, you'll burn fat throughout the day and you'll lose weight. And I took that as, when you don't have a background in science and somebody tells you something, you take it as a fact, what they say. And it was years and years and years later, and I don't know why that stuck in my head, but I realized what they were talking about was an incorrect interpretation of the Randall cycle, which is that all things equal, like in a normal state, if you are taking in, an intake of a mostly fat meal, your tissues, especially the more flexible ones, will burn more fat. Or if you're fasting and your fatty acids are just up because of that. Whereas if you take in, a meal that's mostly any kind of sugars, your flexible tissues are going to use mostly sugars. So it's not that, your breakfast is fat and you're going to burn fat throughout the day and you're going to lose. Of course, it doesn't matter anyway, right? Whether you're burning fat or in some ways. And I found that, so that's a pretty low level thing to understand, to actually go back and see, where did this person that's making this claim get the information from? What are they talking about? Are they, did they just hear something? It's pretty obvious that person probably just heard that from somebody else. And eventually they got it from somebody who was trying to explain the Randall cycle. And once you understand that, you understand that that advice they gave to just have a fatty breakfast and you'll burn fat and lose weight, that's not really good advice. That's not a good claim. So that's the way I approach it. And other than that, I'm just kind of curious about physiology in general. And I've gotten interested in the social process of science. And then as people argue online about scientific stuff, also that social process. Like I'm seeing, you mentioned the omega-3 fatty acids. It seems like we're in a situation of a fad right now where people are revising. So 20 years ago or maybe 10 years ago, it was really cutting edge to start to question the omega-3 thing. Well, probably 5 years ago for the omega-3, 10 years ago for LDL cholesterol being bad. Like, it was cool to say, actually, LDL cholesterol isn't bad. And now it's cool. It's starting to become cool to say, actually, LDL cholesterol is bad. Especially if, like ApoB is
Yeah.
is present, which that's kind of always been known. And I think, at least what I believe, is that's consistent because the ApoB exposure, its antigen activity would be directly related to the age of the LDL of the lipoproteins. So how long they've been in circulation, perhaps exposed to things that could oxidize them. But I guess for some people that's new information. They used to call it small, dense LDL because the more lipids that are liberated from the lipoprotein, the denser it is, because protein's heavier and denser than lipid molecules, whether it's fatty acids or cholesterol. So actually, how about that? What do you think about the current controversies? So we've got, is omega-3 essential? That's kind of a hard question to ask, but is it beneficial? Is it always harmful? Do you have a position on that? And also LDL, or cholesterol in general. Because that seems to be really heating up with people arguing and taking a secondary revisionist position. So at first, of course, everybody thought cholesterol was bad and LDL was the worst. And then around the time of paleo and low carb, it was, cool to say that it's not really a problem, and now it's kind of turning back again. So where do you fall in those types of topics?
I'm not eating any fish right now. No, just to start with what's obvious maybe. You read the paper from Chris Masterjohn about what he wrote about how essential fatty acid could be in the amount if you really wanted to try to be deficient in this, how would it be possible, and what would it be at the beginning? So first of all, it wouldn't be necessarily uh, EPA and DHA. It would be only DHA if you think about these. And also, is it omega 6 at the beginning, or is it omega threes? And what's the amount, and depending where it comes from, and all that. And basically, what I took out of this is that if you really want to be deficient in one of these things, you have to make it. You have to do this on purpose. You have to really make sure you avoid certain things. And right now, I'm not concerned by this at all. Like I haven't taken any fish oil for 5 or 6 years or something like this. And well, not to say I'm perfectly fine. Some people may think I'm crazy, but I feel fine at least. And for the cholesterol part, it's more like some people will even say you cannot even put coconut oil if you want to cook something because it's going to increase the LDL. And I'm like, okay, well, the amount you use for cooking, what's the most important? So you want something stable and you don't want things to get oxidized too much, and basically you don't want that smell and all that. Or you want to think that 3.5 grams of coconut oil is going to be a problem for someone. I mean, at a certain point, how extreme do you want to be? Whatever your stance is. And so the practical thing I get from this is that I don't care basically about cholesterol as long as my health doesn't have any problem. And it's not only this, is that how are you going to use it? Is it useful? Is it something that is just confusing? Like people think it's the problem, but maybe it's there for a completely other reason. And I'm more on this part. Like I don't think it's the problem at the beginning, and I think that there's more. Well, to think of. Oh, so the controversial part, when you look at the amount of money the statin industry gets and all the sudden changes that you get in the amount of cholesterol that's supposed to be good or bad, well, I have, let's say, huge doubts about the intellectual honesty about the industry. And there's all of this. And also, I don't remember who she was, but actually she was on the low carb down under something a channel in YouTube, a woman who explained that whole thing about the statin industry, and also the quality of the data, and that apparently a few people, like really influential people in the field, were able to even remove a few studies because they didn't go in the right direction. And I'm not completely sure about this, but what I know is that for me, it's not a problem. For my clients, I need to take care of this, and I need to make sure that legally first, I won't get any problem because I'm not a registered dietitian and I'm not a medical doctor. So, there's the limit of the things I can do. And what I think personally is that probably is not the problem, but it's only my understanding, and it's not as accurate as yours. For example, when you go deeper in the details, but if yeah, that's pretty much what I would like to say right now. So I don't want to pay attention to palmitate, for example, or sugar because it increases cholesterol. I mean, at a certain point, maybe it's even a good thing. If you are too low, you may. Do you know the guy from Cows Eat Grass?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, for example, one of his last publications about low cholesterol and suicide risk and uh, yeah, heart problems and all that.
Oh, yeah.
Being too low is also a problem. So um, you can always take both sides, have fun a little bit with this, and then listen to what people are saying. And anytime they're too extreme anyway, they're going to be wrong. So
Yeah. I think, yeah, I'm trying to make some videos about that, and the first one that I made about cholesterol, it was pretty easy because I have a presentation that I had to give in school, and I was able to just take slides from that. But the future episodes that I want to make are too complicated to just take what I had done as a student. So that's why. But yeah, there's a couple of questions. Like I've had people say, yeah, all that matters is the ApoB. So all of the studies that you cite where it's just talking about LDL cholesterol don't matter. But I guess it's hard for me to imagine that, say, if you had 10 studies where higher LDL cholesterol ends up either not being associated with any negative outcomes or even positive outcomes. That in each of those cases, the higher LDL cholesterol group actually has lower ApoB, and that the lower LDL cholesterol, that would be very difficult to conceive of, that somehow the ApoB, the protein that's associated with LDL cholesterol, is always higher in the. So yeah, and of course, the companies. You get into the territory where you start sounding like a conspiracy theorist. But from my experience, it's not so much like in academia and in academic research. Pharmaceutical companies are not coming to universities and just giving people money. It's a lie. It's more of a social, and that's why I'm interested in the social aspect of science. Like, for example, right now, we're seeing a transition where I foresee in the next 2 to 5 years, it's going to start being very socially difficult to talk about human sex as binary. Whether you're talking about XY chromosome, whatever you're talking about, it's going to be socially driven to talk about, say, sexual non-binaryism, and that this might not necessarily be data driven, but is sort of socially driven by things like politics. And the same things happen whether it's a moneyed interest like a pharmaceutical thing, where of course research on statins is purely, it's not because people don't make statins at home, so this is just something that's has to do with a corporate interest. And then cholesterol research generally tailors itself, and it's not that the journal publishers or any of these people are directly getting paid. It's this whole kind of, do you have a respectable opinion, and what's the respectable opinion in the academy is driven by probably things outside of just pure scientific data. That's not even that's definitely not the first concern. In some fields it would be. I'm sure there's some fields in physics like optics and things that are pretty tight in terms of like what the average opinion is on a certain scientific question is extremely informed by just the experimental research and not by social conditions. But then when you get into things like medicine, it gets a little wonky. And I guess that's what I have to say about that. So one other what do you think about PUFA? So do you think, as I do, that in particular in the West, I guess America, the Anglosphere, those countries have a pretty similar diet, like the UK, Australia. I'm not sure about the continent. How about continental Europe and oils? Maybe you could tell me about that. But do you think that the shift in cooking fats and added fats and fats that people use dietarily from mostly animal fats or olive oil or things like that to seed oils, do you think that has, on a large scale level, had an effect on people's health and things like obesity, or do you think that that's a secondary or not that important?
Um, I'm gonna answer from the practical perspective and then what I think. Right now, that's one of the first thing I try to remove, because if I want to call something empty calories, even if I don't like the term, like calories that are not necessarily useful but are there anyway, so there's a energetic value. When you replace this by other things that I consider more useful, like let's say you can remove 40 grams of seed oil and you replace this equivalent by fruit, the change is going to be huge. It's the same amount of calories, but the change is going to be huge. So from this practical perspective, you can try to then explain, well, maybe it's better because it's lowering cholesterol and maybe inflammation or blah, blah, blah. But that's not something I get from a empirical perspective. And then you have the side where I read things like LAVA study, things like this. Do you know this old study that were 8 years long or something like this? Okay, you have this one. I read your paper also on fat metabolism and the other things around oxidation, what it can cause, the potential problem also with the metabolism. It's on rats, but from what I remember, for example, being deficient in certain PUFA would increase up to 25% the metabolism, the basal metabolic rate, or something like this. It was on rat, from what I remember. All these things made me consider the fact that if what you want, like being alive, what does it mean as a human? You are at a certain temperature. You need a lot of energy and stable energy because you're basically warm and your brain is not a joke. It's really consuming a lot of energy. So what's suited for this? And then if something is theoretically not suited for this, but it seems to work, is there an explanation or not? And right now, I don't think that it's necessary at all to get even a few PUFAs in your diet because you can do your omega-9 mono and poly unsaturated fatty acid anyway, med acid. So I don't know. Again, not saying everyone is saying wrong things, but I don't see the point of increasing them instead of other things that can be more useful, like potatoes, fruits, complete meat pieces, like with the gelatinous part and things like this. Why would you replace things like so nutritious like this by seed oil? So at a certain point, the question is simple: where can this caloric surplus come from? It's a mixture of everything, cool, but what is not necessary and what's there in the huge amounts? And probably that's a big part of the problem. So yeah, I tend to remove them, like one of the first advice I give. If you
Yeah.
can and you don't like them and it's not complicated, just remove them and change these calories by something more useful, even something that you may more like even more. So
So what do people cook with around where you live?
uh, it depends. People that are not informed at all, they tend to use how do you call this? Peanut oil. You say this?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, peanut oil. And people that are more informed tend to use uh, ghee or ghee. I don't know how you say it. Clarified butter.
I think we say
Uh,
ghee.
Ghee, okay, yeah. Ghee and coconut oil, sometimes olive oil as well. That's not something I recommend, but I mean, you could if it's not too hot and you don't use too much of it. Uh, but yeah, usually people around me, I would say this is not the average person, not to say I'm very special, but I'm at least informed on these topics. I would use
But
coconut
like in
oil
this in the
or
stores, so if you go into an American supermarket, you can see a whole aisle of in clear plastic containers, soybean or safflower, the different
yeah, yeah.
types of vegetable oils. Is that something that is the same thing in European supermarkets or less prevalent?
Less. You will have some, but you will have all the oils next to them. But you will have the so-called healthy alternatives. Colza, how do you call this? In it's yellow and it smells really bad.
uh,
How do you call this in English? I
what's
don't
it made
remember.
of?
But it's also a monoculture of fat. But basically, it's better for omega threes.
Is it
Well, I don't have it in
flax?
English right now.
Flax?
Yeah, yeah, it can be flaxseed. No, flax is a lin. But well, there's another one,
Okay.
colza, which is
Oh,
similar in
canola.
canola. Thanks. Yeah, that's it. Canola. So you have canola and flaxseed. These are the things you are going to find, and organic, good for omega threes. Blah blah. All the health components are going to be like huge on the yeah. But only maybe one third or one fourth of it is going to be like the oils we're talking about, soy oils, things like this. But soy is not so prevalent here, not as much as the other ones.
Yeah, well, the America, our agriculture subsidy structure is directed a lot towards soybean production for oils and corn for oils, and then also for all the other uses of corn, and then even for petrol, ethanol. Uh, when you get gas at a American gas station, oftentimes the sign will say as much as 10% ethanol
Okay.
in the mixed in. So I wish I could avoid that because I think modern engines or the gas tanks are made to withstand this, but older cars, it can cause a problem because it has a different relationship with water, and it can cause uh, water-related, oxidizing rust problems. So we're pretty close to about an hour and a half here. Did you have any specific topic that, or anything you wanted to say? You should also give, if you want to give your Instagram or YouTube.
Oh, yeah, why not? But this is going to take 30 seconds maximum. So yeah, I was thinking about maybe a subject we could talk about. Yeah, one small thing, really easy to talk about. Something that is called SMF, protein sparing modified fast. Have you heard about this? So basically, you fast, but you add proteins, so you don't
Hmm.
use too much of your muscles. Have you heard about this?
Uh, no. So that would be eating nothing but protein. So a
Exactly.
fast. Uh,
So
I haven't heard about that. I did. One of my professors did a study like that. It was for a bone study, and so it was to see how much bone change in the bone from a DEXA scan would occur if you just consumed I guess as much protein as you can before you get to that limit where you're releasing too much ammonia. Um, but not from the perspective of a fast for any kind of therapeutic reason.
okay, well, this would even be for, you want to lose fat as quickly as possible, but you don't want to lose muscle. And so you just keep enough protein, like for example, let's say the famous 1 gram per pound of body weight. So you get this amount of protein and basically nothing else. So you are not going to eat a lot. So it's going to be a protein sparing modified fast. And I wanted to talk about this because it's something that can be really popular. People they want quick result anyway. So if they can go as quickly as possible, and the second thing that's important after going to the gym to retain muscle mass is going to be the amount of protein. They are going to do exactly this. So I go to the gym, I eat my 1 gram per pound of body weight of protein, and then, well, the rest is not important because I want to lose fat as quickly as possible. And I just wanted to talk about this because that's one example that I find interesting. It can be considered as a good tool for example, clients that are not losing weight. So just do this. So you're sure you are going to keep your protein, but as there's nothing else, obviously they are going to be in a caloric deficit. It can be really extreme. And I wanted to say why I really don't like this, because this is one aspect of the metabolism of protein. But what about the anticatabolisme protéique musculaire in English? The fact that when you eat carbs, there is this thing saying, we have glucose already. We don't have to go through neoglycogenesis. So carbs also have this effect.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a mixture of both, it would already be better than having only protein, and you would still be in a huge caloric deficit. So even if your goal is not to lose muscles, you can still change a little bit this type of paradigm where only one thing matters. So one, caloric deficit. They're not losing enough, so just make sure they have enough protein, and then, well, basically nothing else. So and it can be considered really like people are going to be honest, and they are going to say this is a good tool. If it doesn't work, just put them on the PSMF, protein sparing modified fat. So yeah, that was just something I wanted to mention, because I find for the long term health, it's really not going to be a good idea.
Yeah, that sounds like that could actually lead to an acute health problem as well if you're not paying close enough attention to metabolites. That if you're not, ammonia can really sneak up on you with, like the rabbit. starvation stuff that people talk about, that they talked about with lean times in the Inuit. I guess that basically is rabbit starvation. The protein modified or whatever fasting.
Okay, yeah.
um, yeah, yeah, that sounds like a bad idea. The one extreme thing that I would maybe think is reasonable is if people try something like a zero fat diet to see, how they tolerate that. I think some people don't tolerate it too well. I don't like it. Um, but I think if you do tolerate zero fat, that you can get sort of above and beyond results, maybe that your caloric intake might indicate with something like that. But yeah, protein alone, that's actually, I think that might, based on what I remember, that might be bad for your bone as well to just consume protein. Uh, so, um, yeah. So how about your info?
Oh
Uh,
yeah, cool. Cool. No, that was just one thing I wanted to add because I thought it was important because it's still, you have this paradigm of evidence-based
right. Well, is that
recommendations.
evidence based though? I mean, is it?
Uh,
Well, okay. Have they done clinical trials on that? I guess they have. They've done starvation studies, and I think people have done protein alone, studies to see what happens. But the results are very pathological, as far as I understand.
for example, do you know in the different types of courses you can get like Macronutrition University, Bayesian bodybuilding, things like this? You're aware of these types of
I've only heard of
courses?
them. I don't know what they are.
Okay. So from where I heard the information, this would come from a group from Menno Henselmans. Maybe you know him. He's the boss of Bayesian bodybuilding. And they're basically only using information that come from studies or interpretations that come from studies in order to put practical applications for the gym and how to basically get lean or get jacked. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it comes from I would say this type of environment. So I'm not going to say I know exactly the study and
Mm-hmm.
the design and all that, but it comes from people that have this philosophy for sure.
Okay. Yeah, that's pretty extreme to come from that community. Um, I guess, I mean, if it's just a few days, that's one thing.
Yeah, well, as usual. But if it's like the new normal, where basically when you don't train, you just do a protein sparing body fat fast, that would be pretty
Right.
extreme. Yeah,
Yeah.
but that was it. Cool.
Okay. I don't think we have really any questions. I mean, there was, have you all heard of the croissant diet? Uh,
Croissant.
I don't know if that's a real or a joke.
Probably a joke. I hope so.
A pickle brand that isn't kosher. I don't know of a pickle brand that isn't kosher. Uh, yeah, no, no. Screw the questions. Uh, yeah, we should just end it soon. But yeah. So you have a YouTube channel. It's in French
Yeah,
though, right?
it's in French. Yeah, I have three, maybe four videos in English. Most of
Mm-hmm.
them are with Tomo Littlewood.
Oh, okay, great, great, great. And so your YouTube channel is
So if you can spell it correctly, it's Will Janssens. You said it almost perfectly. You said Janssens, which is pretty good. Thank you for your effort. So it's Janssens. And Will
right, and your Instagram
is Will. I don't know how you say this uh,
yeah,
below.
underline.
Underline, thanks. So Will underline coach underline you,
Ah, is that
which
a
is a little game. I'm going to
double
coach you.
entendre?
A what?
you know, oh wait, that's a French word, so I have to say it right. A double entendre, where it's your name, but it's also
Hmm?
I will coach you. Is
Exactly,
that
that's
what
it.
you're doing? Okay,
It's exactly this.
very clever.
Yeah, well,
Um,
sorry, it's just as bad as it is.
all right. Well, thanks a lot for talking. It was, I think we had about like between 15 and 20 viewers the whole time. So that's pretty good for me, actually, especially for something that I only mentioned yesterday.
Oh, cool. Okay.
And yeah, maybe sometime in the future we can talk again when there's more to talk about. So to everybody out there, it's only not quite 4 p.m. here, but where you are, it's almost 10 p.m.
Yep.
So bonsoir.
Bonsoir. Well done for this one. Yeah, people can probably see from the light behind me. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure. It was to be transparent, an honor because I've been following your work for a while, and thinking that right now I'm just chatting with you casually. That's pretty cool.
Oh,
So thanks, man.
yeah. Thanks a lot.